Chapter 77 Rogge's Treatment. You are listening at Mtlnovel.audio. Rogge was half kneeling, bleeding badly. The fight had been brutal, especially with Jace's arrows and the enemy cavalry's spears. Rogge had taken some serious hits to his arms and torso, on top of all the blood loss. "You're really messed up," Usopp blurted out, surprised. Luffy, Nami, and Vivi all wore similar expressions. Sweat and blood covered Rogge's face. "Sit down, quick," Dr. Kureha ordered. Rogge lowered himself to the ground, his muscles twitching. Now that he was relaxing, the full extent of his injuries was hitting him. Dr. Kureha examined his arms, chest, and abdomen. "Nasty wounds. Lucky nothing vital was hit. Looks like you were skewered pretty good," she said, carefully probing. "That was one heck of a fight," Usopp muttered, his teeth chattering. Dr. Kureha turned to Chopper. "Chopper, hand me the anesthetic." Chopper, well trained, grabbed a jar of thick anesthetic from the medical kit and drew some up with a needle. "Here," he said, handing the needle to Dr. Kureha. She injected the anesthetic into several of Rogge's wounds. "Alright, scalpel time. Good thing there's no shrapnel or anything still in there," she announced. "Do what you gotta do," Rogge replied. Dr. Kureha got to work. Even though none of the wounds were immediately life-threatening, they were deep. She cut them open, cleaned them out, applied medicine, and then stitched them up. Nami and Usopp watched for a few moments, then grimaced and turned away. Luffy, after a glance, was off finding something to eat for everyone else. The operation went smoothly, starting with Rogge's arm, then came the chest and abdomen. Even for a skilled doctor like Kureha, it was hard work. Rogge realized that this seemingly grumpy old woman actually cared a lot and was a real pro at her job, with a strong sense of duty. After a long time, all of Rogge's wounds were stitched and bandaged. "Done," Dr. Kureha said, as if it was no big deal. Rogge looked down at his bandaged torso. "Thanks, Dr. Kureha," he said, bowing respectfully. She just nodded. Vivi came over to check on Rogge, then turned to Dr. Kureha. "Thank you so much, Doctor." "How much do I owe you?" Dr. Kureha, already reaching for her bottle of booze, glanced at Rogge and Vivi. "Forget about it. He's a hero for standing up to that jerk Wapol. I wouldn't take a dime." Rogge and Vivi were surprised. Just then, a large figure approached. "So, you're the ones who fought Wapol's pirates." Rogge looked at the man. He was tall and broad, wearing a heavy coat. He looked like a strong, dependable guy. "I'm Dalton, leader of the Drum Kingdom Resistance," the man announced. Rogge recognized him as the most courageous man in the kingdom, the one who dared to oppose Wapol. Dalton looked Rogge over. "You guys are true heroes. You're the ones who drove back the thousands of troops attacking here," he said, impressed. "Thanks, but Wapol pretty much forced our hand," Rogge said. Dalton glanced at Vivi and said, "I heard from her about what happened. Wapol is a real piece of work, no principles, just money and power. Because of your fight, we had time to evacuate the villages. So, on behalf of the people here, thank you." Dalton bowed deeply. Rogge and Vivi understood this was a necessary gesture of gratitude, so they responded with equal seriousness. After a few seconds, Dalton straightened up. "If anyone else is hurt, please ask Dr. Kureha to help." "Thanks a lot," he said to her respectfully. Dr. Kureha looked at him. "You don't need to ask. I'll treat them anyway. Hey, if you've still got people waiting, I'll make sure they get seen quickly." Zoro and Sanji were standing behind Rogge. "I don't need anything." "Rogge took the worst of it," Sanji said. "I'm good. Just a scratch," Zoro added. Even though the two had been fighting fiercely, Rogge had shouldered most of the burden, so they'd only suffered minor injuries. Luffy, meanwhile, was already bouncing around, looking for more food. "Really? Okay, then I can help them out," Dr. Kureha said. Dr. Kureha and Chopper began treating the villagers. Dalton looked at Rogge, and Rogge returned the look. "Dalton, I want to say something. Our fight just now beat back Wapol's army, but to be precise, we repelled them, not eliminated them." "I'm afraid he'll be back," Rogge said. "Yeah, Wapol won't let this go," Dalton said with a sigh. Though Dalton looked calm, Rogge could see the weight on his shoulders. Rogge glanced up at the towering peak in the center of Drum Island. The barrel-shaped summit was covered in snow and ice, like a giant iron barrel. Cold wind and snowflakes swirled around the mountain. "It's quite a sight," Rogge said. Dalton followed his gaze. "Wopple's up there?" Rogge asked. "Yes," Dalton replied. Dalton's eyes were filled with hatred and anger, a righteous anger against evil. Nami and Usopp joined them. Seeing Rogge's bandaged body, Usopp asked, "Rogge, are you gonna be okay?" "I'll be fine, thanks," Rogge said. Nami nudged Vivi and whispered, "Did the doctor charge us anything?" "It's nothing," Vivi replied. Just then, Luffy ran over. "I got food for everyone," he announced, holding up a bag. Usopp cheered. "I'm starving." "Eat something after your treatment," Vivi said to Rogge. "Thank you. I'm ready for a meal," Rogge said politely. After a tough fight and losing so much blood, he was definitely hungry. He needed to eat well and recover. Chapter 78 Good and Evil. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Luffy tore open the bag, spilling its contents: cold cuts, bread, grilled chicken, salted fish, eggs, butter, cheese, veggies, and fruit. Nothing fancy, but Rogge's stomach growled at the sight. Vivi handed Rogge a slice of bread. "Thanks, Vivi," Rogge said, taking it. "You're welcome." "All this food and no booze," Zoro grumbled, eyeing the spread. Usopp and Nami, already starving, started munching on bread and cold cuts. Sanji wrinkled his nose. "This is all raw. Let me whip something up." He began gathering firewood to build a makeshift stove. Wielding a table knife, Sanji delicately sliced the cold cuts, sprinkling them with salt and pepper. He buttered the bread and grilled it on a rack. Usopp, Nami, and Luffy, unable to wait, eagerly helped. Rogge and Zoro chatted nearby. Dr. Kureha tended to the injured villagers. Soon, everyone was feasting on Sanji's creation. Rogge ladled a big bowl of broth from Sanji's pot and took a spoonful. "Wow, this is amazing." He savored the flavor. The rich broth, diced meat, and soft vegetables created an explosion of flavor. Spoon after spoon, Rogge drained the bowl and went back for seconds. This time, he grabbed a piece of toast from the makeshift table and took a bite. Sitting alone by a pine tree, he sipped the broth and munched on the toast. The surrounding pine forest was filled with thousands of villagers seeking refuge. Wopple's resistance was headquartered here. Despite the dire circumstances, Usopp and Luffy's antics brought smiles to both the villagers and even some of Wopple's men. Heavy snowflakes fell from the sky, yet the area felt warm, not from the air, but from the warmth of shared humanity. Dalton approached and sat beside Rogge. "Feeling any better?" he asked. "Yeah, much better. Thanks," Rogge replied. Dalton sighed. "We're surrounded, you know." "What?" After Jess failed, Wopple sent more troops to attack. "This time, it'll be brutal," Dalton explained. "That Jess is a sore loser." "He won't give up," Rogge said. "Scouts report a large enemy force approaching, at least 5,000 strong. And they're packing heavy artillery," Dalton added. Rogge looked up at the falling snow, a wave of pressure washing over him. "So, we're in this together?" Dalton asked. "Of course." Dalton paused. "I used to think all pirates were bad. But you've shown us that pirates can be good people. And you're all so young. You don't have that inherent evil. So, you think labels define who's good or bad?" Rogge asked. "Doesn't seem that way. Even among kings, you have good ones who care for their people and tyrants like Wopple," Dalton pointed out. "A person's character and choices determine their morality," Rogge stated. Dalton stared at the sky for a long time. "Maybe you're right." Rogge continued. "If we tried to break out, could we even escape this island?" "Highly unlikely. Wopple has warships, mines, and forts surrounding Drum Kingdom. The only way out is the port, and it's heavily guarded," Dalton said. "Let me ask you this, since you're so oppressed, why doesn't everyone just leave?" Rogge inquired. Dalton paused, then replied earnestly, "Some have left. But most stay. Except for those enslaved by Wapol, those of us who resist him continue to resist. Drum Kingdom is our home. We'll take back the good country it once was, where everyone was equal. Well, having something to fight for is pretty amazing, Rogge said. Dalton looked at Rogge intently. Do you still want to leave? We can't leave. Not without our ship. And I know the others feel the same way, Rogge stated. You're a unique kind of pirate, Dalton remarked. We all have dreams. We're a group of strong personalities, but we respect each other. Everyone's equal, Rogge explained. Dalton studied Rogge, then looked at the others. It's true. You're all so full of life and driven by your dreams. I've seen pirates who only care about money, killing, and torture. But you're doing it for your personal goals, and you're all equals, Dalton said. Dalton looked at Vivi. Wait, I think I recognize her. I saw her at an international conference when I was a minister under Wapol. She was just a kid then. Yeah, she's a good person. Very responsible, Rogge added. You're all good people, Dalton said. He gazed up at the sky, where heavy snow mixed with the howling wind. The situation remained critical. We pushed them back before, but they're coming again, Rogge said. This time they're bringing 5,000 men, and they must have heavy artillery, Dalton said. For Dalton and the resistance, this could be the end. Rogge looked at Dalton, noticing the hatred hidden beneath his calm exterior. I need to tell my friends. We'll fight side by side, Rogge said. Dalton looked at Rogge gratefully. Thank you. It's nothing. We're enemies of Wapol too. We'd be fighting anyway, Rogge said. He stood up and went with Dalton to talk to Sanji and Luffy. Chapter 79. A Powerful Fortification Group. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Rogge and Dalton walked over to Sanji and the others, sparking a discussion. Look, we have to fight Wapol, Sanji declared. Yeah, we can't dodge him if he's gonna come after us, Zoro agreed. Nami, after a moment's hesitation, asked, okay, we'll fight Wapol. But does he have any treasure? Figures you'd ask about a cut, Usopp grumbled. Treasure? Then let's do this. Luffy exclaimed. We're stuck here until we deal with him, Vivi added. Rogge chimed in, then let's fight alongside Dalton and the people of Drum Kingdom. Sounds good. And just like that, the alliance was sealed. Rogge and Dalton exchanged knowing smiles. They were officially allies now. Dalton, beaming, said, it's an honor to meet such young heroes. The pleasure's all ours, Rogge replied. As everyone chatted, Zoro cut in, so, how big is this attack? Dalton's face fell. 5,000 troops. And a ton of heavy artillery. A collective groan swept through the group. Usopp and Nami looked particularly green. Sanji frowned. That's a lot of manpower. This is gonna be a fight, Zoro muttered. Doesn't matter. We gotta do what we gotta do, Rogge stated. Zoro turned back to Dalton. How many of you are there? I've got 500 resistance fighters here. Maybe a few hundred more scattered around the kingdom, Dalton answered. Usopp started counting on his fingers, his expression growing darker with each number. 500 against 5,000. Luffy piped up, whoa, 10-1. Idiot, what's with the excitement? Nami snapped. Rogue's face was grim, but his eyes still burned with determination. No way out now. We'll just have to make it work, Rogge said. For everyone involved, the numbers were daunting. They had to fight, whether they wanted to or not. We're gonna have to use our heads this time, Rogge added. Yeah, use the terrain to our advantage, Dalton agreed. Alright, let's strategize, Rogge said, turning to the others. While Rogge and the crew were planning their next move in the pine forest, out on the snowfield, some distance away, an army of 5,000 was encircling the pine forest from three sides. The pine forest was bordered by a canyon to the east, and Jace's army was positioned to the west, north, and south. The main force halted on the western snowfield and began constructing fortifications. They began piling up large numbers of ice bricks to build the fortifications. Wagons brought in massive blocks of ice, which were then cut into bricks. These were stacked, formed, and doused with water, freezing them into sturdy, rectangular structures. Inside the fortifications, Jace and several officers were conducting an inspection. "Well, this is the way. Using fortifications to box them in is perfect," Jace said as he walked. The officers around him eagerly briefed him on the situation. "This icy wasteland is perfect for building ice fortifications. We can deploy a large number of troops inside, along with heavy weaponry like machine guns and cannons. If the enemy tries to charge through, they'll be met with heavy resistance," one officer explained. "There's no way even those pirates could break through these defenses, let alone the rebels," another added. The mention of pirates caused Jace's mouth to twitch, a tic that always appeared when he was agitated. The officers immediately realized their blunder and exchanged nervous glances. Jace, having been soundly beaten by Rogge and his crew, was still smarting from the humiliation, but Jace brushed it off. "It's all right. Victory and defeat are part of war. And these fortifications are specifically designed to handle those crazy pirates." "Yes, sir," an officer quickly agreed. "We've fortified the south and north too, in addition to the west. The only opening is the canyon to the east. But anyone who tries to escape through there is signing their death warrant," another officer pointed out. "So, our strategy is to keep them bottled up here. We'll harass them with constant attacks, and any breakout attempts will be stopped by the fortifications. Eventually, they'll freeze and starve to death. Dalton and those pirates will become frozen, starving lions," Jace said with satisfaction. Jace surveyed the fortifications again, now resembling a formidable city wall surrounding the pine forest. "We've completed 2 layers already, and we're reinforcing them. We need to keep building," Jace ordered. "Yes, Commander. Our plan is to build a 5-layer fortification system to completely block them in," an officer replied. "Then keep it moving," Jace commanded. "Yes, sir." The officers responded. Jace continued his inspection, finally stopping in front of the main fortification. After stepping back for a better view, he studied the ice structures from a distance. Each fortification was a rectangular building, constructed from ice bricks. Cannon and machine gun emplacements were positioned in openings along the top. The heavy snowfall was already coating the fortifications, blending them into the snowy landscape. This made them harder to spot. "Smelly pirates, and Dalton's rebels, you're all going to die here," Jace said, a smug grin spreading across his face. Thousands of soldiers had constructed hundreds of fortifications around the pine forest, like a death trap, ensuring that no one could escape. Back inside the pine forest, Rogge, Dalton, and the others, after a strategic planning session, decided to concentrate their forces and break through to the north. "Well, it's our only shot," Dalton agreed. "Dalton, you and your 500 resistance fighters will cover the villagers and break through together." "We'll clear the path," Rogge instructed. Dalton said with admiration, "That's awfully brave of you." "Come on, we're just going in guns blazing." "Some of us wouldn't have it any other way," Rogge grinned. "Yeah, let's go." Luffy cheered. Just then, several of Dalton's men rushed toward them, panting and urgent. "Something terrible has happened," that they gasped out the words. "What is it?" Dalton asked, his voice sharp. Everyone stared at them, waiting for answers. "We just rescouted the area. The enemy isn't attacking, but they've surrounded us with fortifications. There are fortification groups to the south, north, and west. Thousands of enemy troops are building them non-stop. We're completely blocked in," one of the men explained breathlessly. Chapter 80 Advance Exploration. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dalton and Rogge were stunned. "Looks like we're under siege," Dalton said. One of Dalton's men confirmed, "Yeah, the enemies built these ice block houses and packed them with heavy weapons. They're trying to stop us from breaking through." Rogge and Dalton exchanged glances. "Guess our breakout plan just went south." "Yup, time to change tactics." "Didn't expect Jess to pull a siege on us," Dalton replied. Dalton pressed on, "How are these fortifications set up?" "They've got lines on the west, south, and north. 2 layers deep already, and they're still building more," his man reported. Dalton and Rogge's faces turned grim. They were trapped. Hey, Dalton, this pine forest doesn't have any supplies. You think they're trying to starve and freeze us out? Rogge asked. We'll die without even firing a shot. Dalton looked up at the heavy snow falling. That's right. We only brought a little food and gear. Once it's gone, we're done for. Rogge suggested, then let's go take a look. Better to see it for ourselves. Agreed. Need to see the situation firsthand, Dalton said. After a quick discussion, they headed west to scout. Dalton and Rogge arrived at the snowfield west of the pine forest. Here it is, the enemy's fortifications, Dalton's man announced. Everyone looked to see a line of hundreds of snow-covered, rectangular structures blocking their path across the snowfield. The constant snowfall made them look like natural snowdrifts at first glance. That's a lot of fortifications, Dalton observed. Usopp pulled his goggles down and peered at the structures. Even through the snow, he could see windows and the glint of cannons and machine guns. That's insane, Usopp gasped. Sanji, eyeing the fortifications, commented, looks like Wave Mouth learned a lesson after last time. They've really built up their defenses. This is gonna be tough, Sauron said. Wei, staring at the fortifications, said, charging straight in would be suicide. Luffy, excited, shouted, sounds like fun. Let's go take a look. Are you nuts? Don't spook them, Nami snapped, punching Luffy. Rogge, assessing the fortifications, knew there was no way they could break through, and the enemy was still reinforcing the defenses layer by layer. Dalton, we're not getting through the front, Rogge stated. No way, Dalton agreed. We're stuck. While the group was feeling trapped, Jess was inside one of the western fortifications. He had set up a table, made of ice bricks, naturally, and placed a pot of hot coffee on it. Phew, finally finished inspecting all 3 lines. Time for a coffee break, Jess said. He picked up a mug and took a sip. Now that the igloo fortifications were built, the officers and soldiers could relax in their respective posts, drinking coffee and munching on bread and bacon. Suddenly, an officer burst into the room. Commander Jess. Emergency. The officer panted. Jess, annoyed, tried to remain calm. What is it? The guards at the fortifications have spotted the enemy. It's Dalton and the pirates. The same pirates that beat us last time, the officer reported. What? Jess jumped up in surprise, knocking over his coffee pot. Where? Take me there now. Jace demanded. Right this way, Commander, the officer said, turning to lead the way. Jess and several other officers followed him to the top of one of the front row fortifications. From there, they could see the pine forest and the edge of the snowfield. Look over there, the officer said, handing Jace a pair of binoculars. Jace looked in the direction the officer was pointing. Under a pine tree, a group of people were hiding. He saw Dalton, and the face he couldn't forget. Rogge. It really is them. Dalton and that pirate. The whole gang's here, Jess said with a murderous tone. The officer glanced at Jess, who was radiating a chilling aura. Commander, give the order. The officers urged. Jess lowered the binoculars, surveyed the pine tree, and looked around. All right, they dared to come snooping around. They're not leaving, Jace said furiously. The surrounding officers trembled. Jace was usually cold, but this level of rage was rare. It was clear that Jess was still smarting from his defeat at the hands of Rogge and his crew. Order all forward fortifications to open fire. Target the enemy with artillery. And get the cavalry ready to charge. Jace ordered. Yes, Commander. The officers replied. Orders were relayed swiftly. The entire defense line sprang to life as soldiers scrambled to their posts. The front row fortifications were packed with artillery. Cannons were aimed through the windows of the fortifications. Every gun was trained on the cluster of figures beneath the pine tree. Fire! The order unleashed a deafening roar as hundreds of cannons thundered across the snowfield. Shells hurtled toward the pine trees. Rogge, Dalton, and the others were shaken by the barrage. Could it be? Dalton stared at the fortifications in disbelief. We've been spotted, Rogge realized. Hundreds of cannonballs were already screaming through the air. Oh my God! Usopp and Nami cried out. Gah! Chopper yelped, running in circles. Sauron gripped the hilt of his sword. Too many to block. Too much effort, Sanji said, stretching his ankles. Awesome! Luffy cheered, waving his arms. Rogge looked ahead, drawing his thorny whip. Looks like we're in for a fight, Rogge said. Hundreds of shells grew closer. Help! Usopp screamed, running for cover. This is... Dalton's face was pale with sweat. Rogge activated his devil fruit ability, channeling it into the thorny whip, causing it to grow rapidly. Thorn whip, Skynet. The whip expanded into a massive net, spanning tens of meters, forming a shield above the group to intercept the incoming cannonballs. Chapter 81 Building a Bridge. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The shells exploded against the thorn net, dozens detonated, sending flames and smoke billowing over the crowd. Fall back. Now! Dalton yelled. Everybody, move! Rogge, using his devil fruit powers, rapidly grew thorn whips, weaving them into a massive net. The king's army artillery rained down on the Pinewood area, explosions erupted everywhere, sending plumes of snow into the air. Everyone was heading towards the 4 carriages. Get to the carriages, quick! Usopp shouted, terrified, but as they ran, several shells slammed directly into the carriages. The explosions ripped them apart, scattering horseflesh and debris everywhere. A wave of despair washed over everyone. Damn it! Rogge cursed. Usopp's face paled. Rogge desperately tried to use his thorn whips to intercept the shells, but the barrage was too intense. The net kept getting blown apart, and it took time for it to regenerate. This allowed Zoro, Sanji, and others to step in and deflect the incoming fire. Zoro, with Wado Ikemonji in his mouth, wielded Sandai Kitetsu and Shusui in his hands. His powerful swordsmanship sliced through the shells, causing them to explode harmlessly. Sanji, in turn, kicked the shells back towards the enemy lines. Some even slammed into the enemy fortifications. On top of one of those fortifications, Jace was observing the carnage. With this kind of bombardment, they can't possibly hold out. Those pirates are doomed. And that traitor Dalton is finished. Jace gloated. Yes, Commander, we're sure to win. His officers chimed in, eager to please, but just as Jace and his men were reveling in their supposed victory, a shell Sanji had kicked back slammed into the front of their fortification. Holy crap! With screams, Jace and his men were thrown through the air. Jace landed in the snow, staggered to his feet, and spat out a mouthful of snow. Damn it! He looked up to see several more shells flying back their way. What the hell? Jace scrambled for cover. Shells slammed into multiple fortifications. Jace dove into the deeper bunkers. Meanwhile, the king's army continued to bombard Rogge and his group with heavy artillery. Rogge and Dalton fled, finally escaping the artillery's range. The group retreated deep into the pine forest. Talk about bad luck, Usopp said, looking defeated. We're lucky to be alive, Nami replied. Luffy, ever oblivious, wore a puzzled expression. That was fun. Why'd we run? Are you crazy? You may not be afraid of cannonballs, but the rest of us are. Nami snapped. While Usopp and Nami argued, Rogge and Dalton looked grim. They were both trying to figure out how to deal with the current crisis. The king's army's fortifications were like impenetrable fortresses. Dalton, got any ideas? Rogge asked. No. The situation's critical, Dalton admitted. They were trapped, running out of supplies, and just waiting to be wiped out. Worse, thousands of people were hiding in the forest. Food was dwindling fast. Rogge paced, deep in thought, and finally something clicked. Dalton, didn't you say there's a canyon to the east? Rogge asked. Yeah, but it's a dead end, Dalton replied. Rogge fell silent, then said, I want to check it out. You think you have a plan? Dalton asked, hope flickering in his eyes. Rogge replied, take me to look at it, there may be a solution. Seeing that Rogge was serious, Dalton perked up. Alright, he said, in this situation, they had to cling to any chance, no matter how small. Dalton led Rogge and the others towards the canyon to the east. After a while, they reached the edge. This is it, Dalton said, stopping beside Rogge. Heavy snow continued to fall, blanketing the canyon below in white. Rogge peered down, estimating the drop to be hundreds of meters. The distance to the other side was considerable. He scanned the area, but saw no bridges. Dalton turned to Rogge. "Well, Rogge, what's your plan?" "I've got one," Rogge said. "Which is?" Dalton pressed. "We're going to build a bridge. Using my devil fruit power, of course," Rogge explained. Dalton seemed to understand. He had seen Rogge's control over plants firsthand. Rogge continued to pace along the canyon's edge, searching for the optimal spots on both sides. Finally, he stopped. "Okay, time to build that bridge," Rogge announced. He quickly walked over to a tall pine tree near the canyon. This tree was perfect for their needs. Rogge activated his devil fruit power, a green aura enveloping him. Dalton and the others watched as Rogge embraced the pine tree. Before their eyes, the tree began to grow at an incredible rate. Then, guided by Rogge's power, it moved towards the canyon edge and slowly toppled over. The pine tree continued to grow, stretching 50 meters across the gap, but it didn't stop there. The trunk continued to thicken and flatten, transforming into a sturdy, bridge-like structure. "All right," Rogge finally finished, panting heavily. He did it. Usopp cheered, snapping out of his stupor. "So awesome!" Luffy exclaimed. "Still strong," Sanji said. "Gotta admit, that's pretty impressive," Zoro added. Dalton, utterly stunned, could only stammer, I can't believe it." Rogge, drenched in sweat and shivering from the cold, felt exhausted. Dalton and his subordinates were speechless. Rogge walked over to Dalton and said, "Dalton, this bridge should hold." Dalton nodded. "Indeed, well done." Rogge said, "If you want to check, come up and take a look." With that, Rogge stepped onto the pine tree bridge. It felt incredibly solid. Because the entire tree trunk was intact, there were no weak points. Sanji and the others followed, testing its strength with each step. The pine tree bridge proved sturdy and reliable. Chapter 82: The Terrible Long-Range Fortress. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "That's some bridge," Dalton commented. "Still, it's risky letting thousands of people cross it," Rogge countered, "but this bridge is their ticket out of here." "Gotta admit, it's a pretty decent bridge," Sanji chimed in. They all walked to the flat area on the other side, then back to the cliff. Standing at the edge, Rogge told Dalton, "All right, tell the villagers to start moving, quick." Dalton nodded. "Right. This pine forest isn't safe, even if they aren't attacking directly. They might have long-range artillery." Rogge and Dalton hurried back to the pine forest. Dalton's men immediately began evacuating the villagers. Thousands of villagers started crossing the bridge, and the evacuation was going smoothly. Meanwhile, inside one of the western fortifications, Jess was kicking back. "Ah, this is the life," Jess said, sipping hot coffee. Around him, officers were buzzing with activity, using communication devices. Jess asked them, "What's the word? Anything new?" "Commander Jess, all quiet at the northern fortifications," one officer reported. "Commander Jess, same at the southern fortifications," another added. Jess nodded, satisfied. "See? These pirates and Dalton are scared stiff of our defenses," Jess said smugly. "Last time Rogge and Dalton tried to scout, they got blasted back by heavy fire." Jess was convinced no one would dare attack their positions. Their fortifications had them trapped like rats. An officer asked Jess, "Commander, what's the long-term plan for these enemies? Remember those large-caliber mortars from Drexus we mounted on the Iron Barrel peaks? Once they're set up, we can shell targets anywhere in the Drum Kingdom, including right here," Jess explained. The officers' faces dropped. "You mean you're going to bomb this place?" one asked, shocked. Jess replied casually, "Yep, perfect opportunity for a weapons test." "So, Dalton will be wiped out too," another officer said. Jess said proudly, "Dalton and those pirates deserve the worst. This is the best way to give it to them." "But, when will this bombardment take place, Commander?" an officer inquired. "Well, depends on the installation. Should take about half a day to get those cannons ready. So, first shelling starts in about half a day." Jess said, Jess poured himself another cup of coffee and took a sip. Snow was still falling heavily over magnetic drum country, and evening was approaching. The cold wind picked up as night approached. In the eastern canyon, villagers were crossing the bridge to the other side. On the flat ground, Rogge, Dalton, and a small group were bringing up the rear. Finally! So many people are finally getting out of here, Dalton exclaimed. Rogge looked at the bridge, impressed it had handled so many people. Dalton, we've moved a lot of people, but where are they going to go? It's getting late, Rogge pointed out. It was late, cold, and snowy. Thousands of people were in need of shelter. I know a few safe areas we can head to, Dalton said. Usopp shivered. Hey, have you guys figured it out yet? I'm freezing. We're almost out of food. We've been stuck in this forest for 2 days. We need to find some ingredients fast so I can cook something amazing for Nami and Vivi. Sanji said. He's right, we need to resettle all these people, Vivi agreed. Gah! Chopper was running around, shivering from the cold. Zoro, starting to feel sleepy, mumbled, finding a good place to crash wouldn't be bad either. Okay, everyone, follow me, Dalton announced. Nearby was an Iron Barrel Peak, specifically, the third peak from the north. The flat summit, thousands of meters high, was home to warehouses and 4 large forts. The warehouses were packed with munitions, heavily guarded. The 4 forts stood at the corners of the summit. Hundreds of soldiers were scurrying around, making final checks. Inspection of Fort 1, complete. Inspection of Fort 2, complete. Inspection of Fort 3, complete. Inspection of Fort 4, complete. The fort officers gathered in front of the King's Army colonel to report their status. Excellent, the bearded colonel nodded. He picked up a communication device. Reporting to Commander Jess. Artillery on North Peak 3 is ready. For long range, large mortars are installed on the forts. Jess's voice came back, filled with pride. Good. Now you can begin shelling the pine forest as planned. And make sure you use incendiary cluster bombs. Yes, Commander Jess, the colonel replied. The call ended. The colonel barked his orders. All soldiers, listen up. Aim Fort 1 and Fort 4 at the pine forest area. Load the incendiary shells, calibrate, and prepare to fire. Yes, sir. The officers of Fort 1 and Fort 4 scrambled to obey. The colonel, 2 battery officers, and a few aides reached the edge of the mountain, ready to watch the bombardment. Both Fort 1 and 4 were aimed at the pine forest. To the northwest, on the 3-story structure of Fort 1, a 10-meter-long, 1-meter diameter long-range mortar was being calibrated. The black stainless steel mortar had Drexus branded on its side. It sat on a base that could rotate 360 degrees. Attached to the mortar was a calibration device with a long-range telescope. Artillery surveyors, specially trained by Drexus, made the final adjustments. The long-range telescope, combined with the calibration device, could measure distance and elevation. The surveyors crunched the numbers, calculating the precise angles for the mortars. Target area is 29 degrees northwest. Lateral distance is 6,700 meters, altitude difference is 4,100 meters. Recommended slope is 75 degrees. The artillery crew quickly adjusted the cannons to the right positions. The huge mortars pointed menacingly at the pine forest, for artillerymen pushed a shell loader with a runner and lifting lever to the rear of the mortar. They opened the hatch and loaded a 1-meter diameter spherical shell. Fort 4 went through the same process of verification, adjustment, and loading. Both forts were locked on the target, the pine forest area. Fire! .2 deafening explosions ripped through the night. 2 trails of fire arched across the sky, hurtling toward the pine forest. Chapter 83 The Horror Weapon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 2 massive shells slammed into the pine forest, erupting in fiery explosions. Immediately, smaller incendiary rounds scattered in every direction, detonating upon impact and turning the woods into an inferno. The scene was clearly visible in the dark night. Rogge, Sanji, their crew, Dalton, and the villagers, who had just retreated, witnessed the devastating display. What the heck was that? Usopp exclaimed. Did they just shell the area? Dalton wondered aloud. It looked like an incendiary attack. And they definitely came from the mountain, Rogge observed. Some kind of firebomb, it seems, Sanji added. That's insane destructive power, Zoro commented, watching the blaze. 2 shells were all it took to turn the forest into this. Meanwhile, inside the fortified zone west of the pine forest, Jess stood atop a bunker, taking in the spectacle. Through his binoculars, he watched the flames engulf the trees. Impressive devastation. Those Lexus-made long-range mortars and shells are worth every penny. Jess turned to a nearby officer. Tell the forts on North Peak 3 to keep firing. Yes, sir. The officer relayed the order via Den Mushi. Atop North Peak 3, the colonel in charge of the mountain's battery received the message. Understood. We'll continue the bombardment immediately. He hung up. From the summit, the colonel and his men had a clear view of the burning forest below. At 13,000 feet, it was a truly breathtaking, if terrifying, sight. Turrets 1 and 4, fire at will. That the colonel barked the order, and the gunners reloaded and fired. 2 more incendiary shells screamed across the sky and slammed into the pine forest. The flames intensified, turning night into day. Down below, Rogge and Dalton watched the fiery trails arc from the mountain, ending in devastating explosions. The pine forest was now a raging sea of fire. Wapol has a new toy, Dalton stated grimly. New weapons, huh? Rogge asked. Dalton nodded. Wapol is obsessed with wealth and power. He's always looking to expand his riches and his military might, buying up advanced weapons. Drum Kingdom may be small, but he spends a fortune on arms, rivaling some of the world government's bigger players. I heard he ordered some super powerful gear from Drexus, and it looks like this is it. Vivi stared at the destruction. So that's what he's after, wealth and power. He's economically crippling the citizens and crushing them with force. He's a monster. Vivi. Nami said, concerned. Even Chopper, despite running, glanced back in horror and cried out. We need to get out of here, Rogge urged. Agreed. Everyone, move. Dalton ordered. Dalton and his men continued evacuating the villagers, leading them to safer villages. Rogge and Sanji glanced back at the inferno one last time. Let's go, Rogge said. That's one hell of a light show, Usopp muttered. Meanwhile, atop Tsigu Country's central peak, at Wapol's golden palace, Wapol stood, gazing down at the burning pine forest. Those Drexus weapons were worth every penny. Top-notch firepower. He chomped down on a huge grilled steak. A waiter stood nearby, offering him a plate piled high with delicacies. Dressed in a crimson silk robe and a gold crown, Wapol ate and drank, enjoying the spectacle. The pine forest blazed, as more shells arced across the night sky from North Peak 3. That should take care of Dalton and those pirates. Anyone who dares to defy His Majesty Wapol will be reduced to ashes. He grabbed a bottle of red wine and took a swig. Indeed, Your Majesty Wapol. Your might is enough to deter any resistance, Prime Minister Chromalaman said obsequiously. Other ministers chimed in with praise. Long live His Majesty Wapol. To rebel against His Majesty is to rebel against the divine. His Majesty Wapol's rule is unparalleled. Anyone who opposes him is a traitor. Your Majesty Wapol is supremely wise. May you lead the magnetic drum kingdom forever. Wapol lapped up the flattery and burst into laughter. His booming voice seemed to consume everything. The terrifying laughter echoed across the drum kingdom. Back on the ground, Dalton and his group had finally managed to relocate a large number of villagers to other rural areas. Unlike the previous inland villages, many of the residents here were cooperating with Wapol's regime, though mostly in the sense of working for the Wapol Corporation, rather than being loyal followers. Phew, we're finally settled, Dalton said, relief evident in his voice. His men gathered around him, while the villagers began to settle in. These villages, though under Wapol's control, were secretly sympathetic to the refugees. Dalton, while these villages are helping us, we can't stay long. Wapol's always watching, and we're too exposed here, one of Dalton's men warned. It's true. If we stay too long, Wapol will definitely attack, Dalton agreed. Rogge approached. Dalton, let me help you, Rogge offered. Dalton and his men looked at him, surprised Rogge's strength had impressed them, and his offer of assistance was more than welcome. Dalton bowed deeply. "I'm truly sorry to trouble you even further," Dalton said sincerely. "Don't worry about it. Aren't we all in this together?" Rogge replied. Chapter 84 Tree Stump. Underground Space. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "But how are you going to help everyone with so many people?" Dalton pressed. "I've got an idea. I'll get you an underground base," Rogge replied. "Underground base?" Dalton and the others repeated in surprise. Rogge led them to a snowy field on the outskirts. Chopped tree stumps dotted the landscape. Rogge stopped at a stump over a meter wide, examining it carefully. "Okay, this is it," he announced, satisfied. The others looked at him, puzzled, unsure what he was planning. Rogge activated his devil fruit power. A vibrant green light radiated from him, illuminating the snowy ground under the night sky. Grasping the stump tightly with both hands, he channeled the energy from his fruit ability into it. He could now see the internal structure of the stump. Every fiber infused with his plant-based energy. The plant fruit's energy transformed each fiber, causing the stump to undergo dramatic growth and change. Underground, the roots rejuvenated, aggressively burrowing deeper. Rapidly, the roots grew from a few meters to 10, then dozens, then hundreds. As they expanded, they compressed the surrounding soil, creating a massive underground space. This space was shaped according to Rogge's will, eventually forming a cuboid. Rogge worked tirelessly while everyone else waited in silence, not daring to interrupt. Finally, Dalton checked his pocket watch. "It's been 2 hours, he announced. He looked back at Rogge. Rogge stood up. Finally, Rogge said. His body ached with fatigue, but he felt satisfied after working so hard. He waved the others over. "Come on, everyone." Sanji, Zoro, and Dalton approached. Before them stood the same tree stump, now hollow. "The stump's empty," Sanji observed. "Come with me, and you'll see," Rogge replied. He stepped into the hollow and jumped down. Sanji and Zoro exchanged glances. "Let's go take a look," Sanji said. "What's the catch?" Zoro grumbled. The two jumped down. "Gonna go play," Luffy cheered as he jumped in. "Guess I'll go too," Dalton sighed, following after. Vivi jumped down last. After dropping into the stump's hollow, they found a gently curving passage. Rogge led them deeper. After about 10 meters, they emerged into a vast underground space. It was bright and spacious, resembling a huge square capable of holding thousands. "Wow! So much room!" Luffy exclaimed, immediately running around. Sanji and the others stared at the massive cuboid basement. "How is this possible?" Dalton asked, stunned. "Unbelievable," Sanji muttered, cigarette dangling from his lips. "Incredible," Zoro added. Everyone gazed at the huge, cuboid basement. "It is unbelievable," Vivi agreed. Their eyes scanned the walls of the cuboid, made of interwoven tree branches. "Why is it made of branches?" Dalton questioned. "Exactly. The branches expanded and grew quickly, compressing the soil to form the whole basement," Rogge explained, walking to the wall. Sanji, still smoking, sidled up to Rogge. "Then how's it so bright down here?" "Ah, I modified the plants so their roots emit light," Rogge answered. Vivi surveyed the space. "This place really can hold a lot of people. This is so spacious. You can rest here." Usopp's voice echoed from the entrance. Usopp came running into the chamber. Nami and the rest of Dalton's men trailed behind, gasping at the sight. Dalton approached Rogge, full of gratitude. "It's amazing you could build a basement this big." "It's nothing. We needed somewhere to rest, so I used my ultimate plant transformation ability, Tree Stump, underground space," Rogge said. Usopp rushed to Rogge, beaming. "Great! We can live here. We're safe from the wind and snow, and the underground secure, so we don't have to worry about attacks." "Yeah. We can have a banquet." Luffy chimed in. Both of them celebrated. Dalton's 500 men streamed into the basement. "It's really nice here. No need to worry about Wapol and his army attacking," Dalton said. "Don't worry about it. The base is yours," Rogge replied. To have this ability, it's like you're a god. Dalton exclaimed. Don't exaggerate. I just built a base for you, Rogge said, waving his hand dismissively. Dalton's men began to praise Rogge, Sanji, Zoro, and the others. Thank you. You saved the day. Not only are you capable, but you're willing to help. It's amazing. Usopp, eager for attention, pushed to the front of the crowd. Yes, our pirate crew is the best in the world. It has potential, thanks to Usopp's wise leadership. Under my wise instructions, Rogge helped you solve your problems. The other members of the pirate crew are extremely brave and overcome all difficulties. This is all thanks to Captain Usopp. Luffy ran around the basement. Nami, having found a place to sit, watched Luffy and Usopp with a disgusted look. Okay, let's rest too, Rogge said to Vivi and the others. Sanji glared at Zoro, who was already asleep. Zoro was known as the Sleep King of the pirate group, and nothing but fighting could wake him. This is quite the lively bunch, Sanji muttered, lighting another cigarette. But at least it's safe here. Yeah, you can sleep on your own, Rogge yawned. I can't stand them. After all the excitement, everyone started to fall asleep. The wind and snow howled outside, but no one dared venture out into the night. Soon, the basement was filled with snoring. Chapter 85 The Severe Situation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It's daytime, and everyone, Roger, Sanji, Dalton, and the rest, are awake. In the massive basement, they started figuring out their next move. Roger, Sanji, Zoro, Luffy, Usopp, Nami, Vivi, and Dalton huddled with their key people to strategize, while the others watched. Okay, we all want the same thing, to take down Wapol, Dalton stated. Dalton, how big is Wapol's army? Sanji asked. Based on our intel, Wapol's forces are split into mountain guards, mobile army units, local security, coastal artillery, and a fleet. The coastal artillery and fleet are stationed around the Drum Kingdom's islands. In total, he has around 30,000 troops. The local security, responsible for urban and industrial areas, numbers about 6,000. The mobile army, directly under Commander Jess, is 10,000 strong. They're the ones who attacked us. And the mountain guards, defending the 7 peaks, including the central one, have 5,000 soldiers, with the central peak guarded by the elite 1,000. Dalton said calmly. Usopp and Nami were floored. 30,000? Seriously? Usopp stammered. We're doomed, Nami whimpered, tears welling up. Whoa. 30,000 guys. Ha ha ha. Luffy laughed, unfazed. Roger turned to Dalton. What about the resistance? How many do we have? My 500, plus other hidden fighters around the kingdom, brings us to about 1,000, Dalton replied. 1,000 against 30,000? That's a massive difference. Where does Wapol get so many soldiers? It can't be easy for the Drum Kingdom to recruit that many. Roger wondered aloud. The odds were definitely stacked against them. Wapol hires a lot of foreign mercenaries. He pays them big money to be his royal guard. A lot of them are bounty hunters and killers. They also have heavy weapons, warships, cannons, machine guns, some newer stuff. Plus fortifications, castles, warehouses, cavalry, special forces. A lot of it is imported weaponry and troops trained at the Drexus Military Academy. And to top it off, the 7 iron barrel peaks have long-range mortars that can hit anywhere in the kingdom, or even the sea around it, Dalton explained. That's a lot to deal with, Roger commented. It's insane that such a small country has so many troops, Sanji said, blowing a smoke ring. The Drum Kingdom wasn't that big, but Wapol's army was huge. This is gonna be tough. They gave us a hard time already, Zoro grumbled. The situation was looking bleak. Is there any way to win? Vivi asked. Dalton, I think if we take out Wapol, his army will crumble, Roger said after a moment of thought. Dalton nodded. Yeah, but Wapol's tough to get to. He's holed up on the central peak, the highest one. Still, we have a shot. We can try to attack the central mountain, Rogge countered. We've tried, and we failed. And we only ever got close to Wapol when he wasn't on Central Mountain, Dalton said. Even if it's a long shot, let's take it, Rogge insisted. All right, Dalton agreed. Everyone else voiced their agreement. They didn't have much of a choice. Meanwhile, in the pine forest, the area was a wreck from the shelling. Jess and his troop surveyed the damage. Scorched pine tree remains littered the ground, and the snow had been burned away, exposing the earth. Damn, the shelling last night burned everything, but we didn't find any enemy bodies, Jess complained. His soldiers searched frantically but found no remains. Where did they go? Did they just vanish? Jess wondered. Don't worry, Commander. They're still on this island. People can't just disappear, an officer reassured him. Keep searching. They probably found a cave or some other way out, another officer added. Jess was still frustrated. Just then, another officer rushed over. Reporting. New discovery in the East Canyon. Jess and the other officers looked at the report. Let's go. Jess ordered. They headed to the eastern canyon. Reaching the edge, they looked down. At the bottom of the canyon, lay the remains of a huge pine tree. What the hell is this? Jess exclaimed. The other officers were equally stunned. The pine tree wreckage had been damaged by the shelling, but it was still roughly shaped like a massive bridge. How could they build a bridge like that, out of a single tree? Jess asked in disbelief. How could they have done this? We didn't have defenses set up in the canyon, but we scouted it, and they couldn't have gotten through. This bridge must have been built after we checked it, an officer pointed out. Jess stared at the tree remains for a long time. And if there aren't any bodies, that means they retreated before the shelling started, Jess realized. Commander, what now? An officer asked. We ramp up the search. And I think this is part of a bigger plan. Dalton's joined forces with pirates, which is a big threat to Wapol, Jess declared. The previous fight had shown Jess the power Rogge and Sanji possessed. He believed the pirates had helped Dalton and the rebels build the bridge. Pirates. I'll kill them all, and Dalton's people too, Jess vowed. Chapter 86. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeing Jess's anger, the other officers tensed up too. Commander Jace, one officer ventured, if you think the pirates and Dalton are planning something big, what do you suspect? I have a hunch, but nothing concrete yet. They might be targeting King Wapol himself. Assassinate King Wapol. The officers were stunned. It's not impossible. Wapol's been targeted before when he left the castle. Dalton and his people tried it multiple times, but they always failed. Now that these pirates are in the mix, they might try again. We're stronger than Dalton's forces, so their best bet to even the odds is to take out Wapol and leave us without a leader. Daring to attack King Wapol. The nerve of those guys. An officer exclaimed. It's a desperate gamble. Those pirates are villains, and Dalton's a traitor. It's not surprising. But as officers, we're failing if we let it happen, Jace responded. The officers' faces turned grim, fully aware of the gravity of the situation. Regardless, we need to beef up security around King Wapol, Jess declared. He glanced up at the imposing Iron Drum peaks, thousands of feet high, dominating the landscape of Drum Kingdom. If those 7 peaks fell, even an army would be vulnerable. I'll contact the mountain guard on Central Peak immediately, and the other peaks as well. We have to make sure we control all 7, Jace said. Jess took a den mushy, phone snail, from an officer and made the call. Mountain guards, I suspect Dalton and the pirates are planning to assassinate King Wapol. You need to increase security across the board, Jess instructed. Understood, Commander Jace. We'll protect King Wapol's safety, came the reply. Good. King Wapol's safety is priority number 1 from now on. Every supply shipment and every person entering or leaving Central Peak and the other 6 peaks needs to be thoroughly checked and heavily guarded, Jess emphasized. Yes, sir. After ending the call, Jess pulled out another den mushy, this one bearing Wapol's emblem and inlaid with gold. his direct line to the king. Only Army Commander Jess and Prime Minister Correja had this privilege, being Wapol's most trusted advisors. After a moment, the line connected. "Jace, what is it?" An arrogant voice boomed. Jess replied respectfully, "Your Majesty, I apologize for the intrusion, but this is urgent." "Spit it out. If you're using this line, it better be," Wapol snapped. "Your Majesty, I led an elite force into a fierce battle, but we failed to eliminate Dalton and the pirates. They're too cunning and strong. Based on their actions, I believe they may try to attack Central Peak, where you are." "Really?" Wapol's voice was a mix of surprise and anger. Few dared defy Wapol, let alone attempt assassination. Wapol hated Dalton for his defiance and past assassination attempts during his tours of the kingdom. "Your Majesty, they're backed into a corner, making it a high possibility. We must be prepared," Jess urged. "All right, I'll stay in the palace on Central Peak," Wapol conceded. "Please do, Your Majesty." "I'll mobilize more troops and hunt them down," Jace assured him. "I expect results." "I'm leaving this to you," Wapol said. "We won't let you down, Your Majesty," Jace promised. The den mushy clicked off, ending the call. "Okay, order 1,000 more troops to the cable car station near Central Peak and 300 more to each of the other peaks," Jace commanded. "Yes, sir." The officers responded. Meanwhile, after consulting with Sanji, Dalton, and the others, Rogge and his crew were scouting near Central Peak. Central Peak, the tallest in Drum Kingdom, was the heart of the 7 peaks. Rogge, Sanji, Zoro, Luffy, Usopp, and Dalton stood at its base. Rogge gazed up at the towering mountain, its peak piercing the snowy sky. Snow clouds swirled around its iron barrel-shaped peak, shrouded in ice and snow. At the very top stood Wapol's palace. "This is Central Peak," Usopp said. "What a mountain," Zoro muttered. "Impressive. But getting up there won't be easy," Sanji observed. "No, it won't," Dalton agreed. "So, how do we get up?" Rogge asked. "Look there." Dalton pointed to a field at the mountain's base. A flat platform, built of brick, was heavily guarded by soldiers. "There," Sanji said, "that's where the cable car system is." "Exactly. Pods come down, then they load up supplies and people for transport. That means that area is their main defense point," Dalton explained. "Yeah, attacking that directly will be tough," Rogge said. As they spoke, another large group of soldiers arrived, bringing cavalry, infantry, and carriages, enough to cause serious trouble. 1,000 strong, they stopped to unload machine guns and cannons and began constructing more fortifications. "That's a lot of firepower," Usopp said, his breath clouding in the cold air. "Looks like they're reinforcing their position," Rogge commented. "We've tried attacking Wapol before." "Jess probably guessed our plan," Dalton said grimly. The king's army was working tirelessly, fortifying the area around the cable car platform.